In a place filled with warning labels and growls that pushed every trained officer back, no one imagined that the most feared K9 in America would falter the moment a little girl stepped toward his cage. She had no training, no commands, not even fear, just a gentle look and a quiet whisper that softened a dog believed to be beyond saving. What bond could be powerful enough to cut through the pain, the trauma, and the years of rage that no adult had ever been able to reach? The morning at Clearwater's K9 training center had barely begun when a violent roar cut through the cold air. Officers froze mid-step as the reinforced transport crate rattled hard. Inside, a pair of burning amber eyes glared through the shadows, warning everyone to stay away. Two handlers approached, armored sleeves raised, but the dog inside lunged with such force that the metal frame screeched across the concrete. One handler stumbled back, breath catching in his throat, realizing this creature wasn't scared, it was ready to break anything that dared to touch him. The dog's name was Blaze, though no one here had ever seen him do anything but rage. His fur, dark as scorched timber, bristled with every growl. Rumors had reached Clearwater long before he arrived, the kind of stories whispered between precincts, stories of a K9 no facility could handle. Officer Ray Nolan stepped forward despite the tension. He wasn't fearless, just stubborn. But as Blaze hurled himself at the bars, again, Ray felt the vibration through the floor. Even from a distance, he sensed something fractured behind the aggression, like a heartbeat trying to survive inside a storm. Back away, Captain Marlene Brooks warned, marching toward them. Her voice was steady, trained by decades of ordering chaos into line. But even she paused when Blaze slammed the crate again, twisting the steel bolts with a sickening groan that echoed through the open-air yard. When the handlers opened the crate door, Blaze burst out in a blur of muscle and fury, the chain jerking tight as he hit the end. Officers raised shields, forming a barrier as Blaze fought against the restraint, teeth clashing against the muzzle that barely held his power back. Nearby, a maintenance worker named Caleb dropped an entire toolbox when Blaze jerked sideways. The clatter triggered another explosion of rage from the dog, sending officers scrambling. Caleb froze, eyes wide, realizing he'd never seen an animal so broken that every sound felt like an attack. Ray approached again, slower this time, hands lowered. Blaze's growl shifted, deeper and trembling, not a threat, but a warning from something wounded. For a brief second, Ray saw the dog's chest shudder, as if caught between fear and fury with nothing stable to cling to at all. "Get him to Isolation Wing C," Captain Brooks ordered, but her voice softened on the last word. She wasn't heartless, just painfully aware of what happened to K9S, who couldn't be rehabilitated. Blaze's fate was already hanging by a thread, and everyone sensed it tightening. As Blaze was escorted down the hallway, his paws scraped across the tiles in frantic, restless steps. He kept his head low, shoulders high, glancing at every doorway as though expecting danger to leap out. Officers watched in silence, unsure if they were seeing a monster or something far more tragic. When they reached the isolation kennels, Blaze twisted violently, almost toppling one handler, the muzzle strained under the force of his snarl. But beneath that snarl was a Christ flicker so small it could have been imagination, a flash of confusion, maybe even recognition of a world he no longer trusted. Doors slammed shut behind him, metal clanging like a prison sentence. Blaze paced in circles, his claws tapping the floor in a rhythm that felt like a ticking clock. Outside the bars, Ray lingered, watching the dog's trembling shoulders rise and fall in uneven breaths. The hallway slowly emptied, but Blaze didn't settle. He lifted his head toward the faint hum of voices outside, voices that reminded him of something he once knew, something warm and steady. The memory slipped away before he could hold it, leaving only a hollow ache behind the anger. By the time the building finally quieted, Blaze stood alone in the dim light, staring at the door as though waiting for someone he couldn't name anymore. And in that heavy stillness, the truth hung quietly in the air. This wasn't a monster. They were looking at a wounded soul no one had reached in time. The sun dipped lower over Clearwater as the training center settled into a quieter rhythm. In the observation room, Dr. Ian Mercer stood with a file pressed against his chest, staring through the glass at Blaze. The dog was curled tightly in the far corner, not sleeping, just waiting, as if trapped somewhere far from this place. Dr. Mercer opened the file slowly, pages worn from years of transfers. Reports described Blaze in the cold language of paperwork: unpredictable, aggressive, unfit for duty. But one faded paragraph, nearly overlooked, spoke of a different Blaze, a rescue K9 who once ran into fire when others ran out. He read about the wildfire in Black Ridge Canyon and the team of responders who fought to evacuate a trapped family. Blaze's handler, Ethan Ward, was listed as one of the casualties. Mercer paused, tapping the edge of the page, feeling the weight of those two words, "fell in service," echo through the room. As he read further, details emerged like ghosts: Blaze locating a collapsed cabin, digging through burning debris, refusing to retreat even as flames rolled over the ridge. Witnesses said Blaze stayed beside Ethan until the final moment, barking desperately for help that came too late. Through the glass, Blaze stirred, lifting his head. His ears twitched as if he sensed the memories being spoken in silence. The faintest tremor ran through his shoulders, not from fear, but from something deeper, an ache carved into him long before he ever arrived in Clearwater. Fire Chief Logan Ortiz stepped into the room, still wearing soot-stained boots from his evening drills. He looked at Blaze, with the kind of sadness only men who've walked through fire understand. "He wasn't always like this," Logan murmured. "He used to be the bravest dog I'd ever seen." Mercer turned toward him, curious. Logan leaned in, lowering his voice. "When Ethan died, Blaze didn't run. He tried to pull him out, tried until his paws were raw. After that day, something inside him shut down." Logan rubbed the back of his neck. "You don't forget a loss like that." Inside the kennel, Blaze stood and paced again, but slower this time. His steps were uneven, as though each movement carried the memory of a night he wished he could change. When he paused by the water dish, his reflection rippled in the surface, an echo of the dog he once was. Mercer watched the scene with folded arms, wondering what kind of pain could twist loyalty into fear. Blaze wasn't reacting like a dangerous animal. He was reacting like a soldier, still searching the battlefield for someone he'd never find again. And that truth carried more sorrow than rage. Ray joined them a moment later, holding an ice pack against his bruised shoulder. He stared at Blaze, then at the old reports scattered across the table. "You think he even knows where he is?" Ray asked quietly. Mercer shook his head. "I think he knows exactly where he's not." Blaze pressed his forehead against the bars, breathing slow and uneven. His eyes weren't wild, now they were distant, heavy with something no command could fix. Even Ray, who had seen the dog's fury up close, felt a strange pull of empathy. "He isn't fighting us," Ray whispered. "He's fighting memories." The room fell still for a moment, the kind of silence that seemed to honor what Blaze had endured. The overhead lights softened, casting a warm glow across the cold metal. Blaze blinked once, long and tired, then rested his head between his paws, as though surrendering to exhaustion. Mercer closed the file as the last bit of sunlight faded from the windows. "A dog doesn't break like this, without loving someone more than himself," he said. Logan nodded, eyes fixed on Blaze. "And sometimes, that kind of love leaves the deepest scars." Outside the glass, Blaze let out a barely audible whine, soft, fragile, and full of a grief no one had tended for far too long. The next morning arrived with a sharp chill, the kind that settled into the walls of the Clearwater K9 Center. Captain Marlene Brooks stood in the hallway with a clipboard pressed tightly against her side. Her expression was firm, but her eyes softened when they drifted toward Blaze's kennel. She gathered the staff in a small semicircle, their boots squeaking on the polished floor. "Listen carefully," she began, her voice steady. "Blaze has 7 days, 1 week to show improvement. If he attacks again, or fails basic regression tests, we'll have to remove him from the national program." The room stiffened. Everyone knew what remove meant. Ray felt a hollow sink in his stomach, replaying the moment Blaze slammed against the bars the day before. He'd seen dangerous dogs before, but this felt different. Blaze wasn't vicious. He was drowning in something none of them understood. Officer Jenna Hale stepped forward. She was seasoned, calm under pressure, and known for handling the toughest dogs in the region. "I'll take the first session," she said. "We try structured proximity work. No direct contact." Brooks hesitated, then nodded. "Be cautious, Jenna." Inside the isolation wing, Blaze lifted his head as Jenna approached. His growl wasn't loud at first, just a low vibration that rippled through his chest. She spoke softly, using the same tone she used with K9S, suffering stress fractures. "Easy, boy. You're safe. No one's hurting you here." Blaze tensed immediately. His paws dug into the floor as Jenna stepped closer, the chain between them clinking like a warning bell. She held up a padded sleeve, not to provoke, but to test his reaction. Blaze's ears pinned back, and a deep rumble built beneath his ribs. Jenna crouched, eyes steady. "You don't have to fight me," she whispered. For a heartbeat, Blaze hesitated, his breath catching, eyes flickering with something softer, but the memory of fire, of Ethan's fading heartbeat, surged back like a blow. Blaze lunged. The chain snapped tight as Blaze threw his weight forward, hitting the restraint so hard the metal rattled across the kennel. Jenna staggered back, barely catching herself. Alarms chirped overhead as officers rushed toward the glass, their shouts echoing down the hallway. Ray shoved through the crowd and moved to Jenna's side. She held up a hand, signaling she was fine, though her shaken breath betrayed the truth. Blaze wasn't attacking out of dominance, he was terrified, trapped in a loop of trauma none of them could break. Captain Brooks arrived moments later, jaw tight. She looked at Blaze, then at the trembling chain. The decision weighed heavily on her shoulders. "If this continues," she said quietly, "we won't have a choice." Ray saw the flicker of regret she tried to hide behind her stern exterior. Inside the kennel, Blaze retreated into the corner, panting hard. His eyes didn't blaze with fury, now they wavered with confusion, fear, and exhaustion. He seemed to brace for punishment, for shouting, for the world to come crashing down on him the way it had in the canyon fire. The handlers stepped away, giving him space. The tension in the air slowly thinned, replaced by a heavy, aching stillness. Blaze lowered his head, chest rising and falling in uneven rhythms, as if even breathing cost him more than he had left to give. Ray lingered longer than the others, watching the dog who had once been a hero unravel into a memory of himself. "You've got 7 days, buddy," he murmured, voice barely above a breath. "I hope someone finds a way to reach you before we run out of time." As he walked away, Blaze lifted his eyes toward the fading footsteps. Something inside him stirred, something faint, something wounded. And though the week ahead loomed like a 24-ticking clock, a small crack had opened in the darkness, waiting for the moment someone unexpected would walk through it. The following Saturday brought an unusual calm to the Clearwater Canine Center. Families wandered through the lobby for the community open house, children clutching pamphlets and pointing at posters on the walls. The air was lighter than usual, softer, yet behind the isolation wing door, Blaze felt only the heaviness of another long morning. He lay curled in the corner, barely reacting to the distant voices. The chatter of kids had once meant something warm to him, a reminder of public demonstrations with Ethan. But now, each sound passed through him like a faint breeze that could not reach the ache buried in his chest. Outside his kennel, Ray monitored the hallway, keeping visitors firmly away from the restricted zone. He checked the security latch twice, then 3 times, knowing Blaze could snap at the smallest sound. Even so, he kept glancing toward the dog, sensing a quiet storm lingering beneath the surface. Among the crowd, a little girl drifted behind her mother, Harper Summers, wearing a fox-shaped backpack and dragging a stuffed animal by its paw. Her mother was speaking with an officer, but Harper's curious eyes were caught by the flicker of movement down a dim hallway she wasn't supposed to enter. She stepped away with the gentle certainty only children possess, following a sound she couldn't name. Each footstep echoed softly, until she rounded the corner and froze. Behind a line of steel kennels, a pair of amber eyes stared back at her bright, hurting, and locked onto her as if pulled by memory. Blaze rose slowly, unsure if the tiny figure before him was real or just another shadow from his past. There was no growl, this time, no sudden lunge. Instead, he stood stiff and quiet, watching the girl's small hand tighten around her stuffed fox, waiting to see if she would run. Harper took one hesitant step forward. Ray's voice echoed from behind her, "Hey, sweetheart, stop." But she didn't seem to hear him. Her gaze was fixed on Blaze, studying the sorrow hidden beneath his trembling shoulders. She whispered, "You look lonely," her voice barely brushing the air. The words drifted into the kennel like a soft thread, and Blaze's breath caught. Something inside him shifted, fragile as a candle, flame in wind. He stepped closer, not with aggression, but with a kind of desperate curiosity, his pause slow, his muscles trembling from a feeling he hadn't known in years. Ray lunged toward them, heart hammering, but when he saw Blaze's posture, he stopped dead in his tracks. The dog wasn't coiled to strike. He wasn't baring teeth or pressing against the bars. He stood still, head low, as if Harper's presence had somehow quieted the storm inside him. Harper pressed her palm gently against the cold bars, her fingers barely touching the steel. Blaze lowered his head until the muzzle brushed the metal, close enough for her to feel the warmth of his breath. For a moment, the world outside that kennel vanished into a silence full of trembling hope. Officers crowded behind Ray, bracing for the worst. But Harper smiled, her voice soft and certain. "It's okay," she murmured. "You're not a bad dog." Blaze's chest rose with a shaky breath, and a faint whine slipped free, a sound no one at Clearwater had heard from him until this second. Tension melted from his shoulders as he held her gaze, not with fear, but with something almost tender. The sight struck every officer in the hallway. This wasn't a dangerous animal losing control. This was a heart remembering something it thought had died beside the man it loved most. Harper's mother rushed in moments later, breathless, pulling her daughter close. But even as she lifted Harper away, the girl reached back toward Blaze, her fingers brushing the air. Blaze leaned forward instinctively, eyes wide, as if afraid the moment might vanish before he understood why it mattered. And as the hallway fell into stunned silence, one truth settled over everyone present. The K9 who had attacked everyone had just melted for the very first time at the touch of a little girl no one expected to change anything at all. The shock of what happened lingered long after the crowd was ushered away. Officers whispered in disbelief, replaying the moment Harper touched Blaze through the bars. No one could explain why the most volatile K9 in the facility had softened instantly for a child he'd never met. Or at least, that's what everyone assumed. In the quiet that followed, Dr. Mercer returned to the observation room, eyes fixed on Blaze. The dog still stood near the front of the kennel, staring at the doorway Harper had disappeared through. His breath was steady now, his muscles relaxed, as if some invisible weight had been lifted from his back. Ray approached cautiously, unsure what version of Blaze he'd see next. But the dog didn't growl, didn't retreat, didn't tense. He just watched, eyes calmer than Ray had ever seen them. It was as if Harper had reached into a place no handler, no expert, no amount of training had been able to touch. Captain Brooks arrived moments later, jaw tight from wrestling with decisions no manual prepared her for. "We need to know what happened," she said firmly. "Blaze doesn't respond to seasoned officers, but he responds to an 8-year-old? That's not coincidence, that's history." Mercer reviewed the security footage carefully, slowing the moment Harper arrived. Blaze's stance changed instantly, the rigid posture, the defensive snarl, all of it melted the second he saw her. Mercer leaned closer to the screen, murmuring to himself, "That's recognition, but from where?" As the staff debated, Harper returned with her mother for a scheduled follow-up tour. She clutched a tiny silver pendant, her father's old firefighter badge charm, sometimes lifting it to her lips like a quiet promise. When she passed the isolation wing again, Blaze rose to his feet, before anyone could stop him. Ray cautiously opened the viewing window. Harper stepped forward, placing her small hand on the glass. Blaze inched closer until his muzzle brushed the barrier, his breath fogging a faint circle near her fingertips. Harper giggled softly, the sound gentle as falling leaves. "Hi again," she whispered. "I missed you." Something flickered in Blaze's eyes, an echo of a memory long buried. A crackling fire line. A man's steady voice calling commands. A tiny girl with pigtails running across a training field before a demonstration. The images drifted like smoke, not fully clear but painfully familiar. Mercer noticed Harper's pendant when it fell forward on its chain. Blaze froze, nostrils flaring as he leaned closer. The scent hit him like a distant echo: ash, pine, smoke, and the faint trace of someone he once trusted more than anyone. He pressed himself against the bars with fragile urgency. Harper looked at Blaze with wide, innocent eyes. "You remember this?" she asked, touching the charm. "It was my daddy's." The words landed in the room like a stone tossed into deep water, sending ripples through the air. Blaze let out a trembling whine, a sound full of longing and recognition. Ray exchanged a glance with Mercer, something dawning between them. Mercer pulled up old records, flipping through pages until he found the name. Adam Summers, firefighter, assigned to rescue rotations near Ethan Ward's unit. Harper's father had once trained alongside Blaze's handler years before she was born. Captain Brooks entered again just as Mercer spread the documents across the table. "This connection," he said slowly, "didn't start today. Blaze has smelled this scent before. He's heard that voice. He's known that family." Brooks stared at the evidence, stunned. "So he didn't calm because she's a child," she whispered. "He calmed because she's familiar." Inside the kennel, Blaze lay down for the first time in days, his eyes following Harper even as she took a few steps back. He didn't growl, he didn't shake, he simply watched her with something soft and haunted, a quiet devotion awakening in a corner of his heart he thought had been lost forever. And in that still hallway, while officers tried to make sense of it, a deeper truth had already settled inside Blaze. He had not met Harper for the first time. He had finally found the one thread that tied his broken world back to the life he had loved and lost. The following evening settled over Clearwater with the kind of cold that seeped into concrete. The K9 Center was quieter than usual, its hallways dimmed to night mode lighting. Blaze, still calmer since Harper's visit, lay near the front of his kennel, watching the doorway as if expecting her to return. Ray walked the corridor with a clipboard tucked under his arm, checking latches out of habit. He paused at Blaze's kennel, noticing the dog's steady breathing. It was the most peaceful Blaze had looked since arriving. "If only you could stay like this," Ray murmured, tapping the metal gently. Outside, a maintenance crew worked late behind the main building, replacing old propane tanks used for emergency drills. No one paid attention to the faint hiss that didn't belong, an unsealed valve, leaking into the cold night air. The sound was small, invisible, but growing, more dangerous, by the second. Inside his kennel, Blaze stiffened, his nose twitched. A scent he'd never forgotten: raw gas, heat, pressure washed over him like a tide. His ears flattened, and his chest tightened. The world around him began to twist, folding into memories of Black Ridge Canyon, where the fire had swallowed everything he loved. Ray noticed the sudden shift and knelt down. "Hey, what's wrong?" But Blaze's eyes were wild now, pupils wide, breath sharp and shallow. The present dissolved for him. He heard cracking timber, felt scorching wind, smelled Ethan's soot-covered jacket as the world burned around them. The explosion came a heartbeat later, a sharp concussion behind the center that shook windows and sent a shockwave down the hall. Lights flickered violently. Ray was thrown to the floor, his clipboard skidding across the tiles. Alarms blared overhead, filling the building with pulsing red. Blaze slammed against the door in blind terror, claws screeching over the steel. He lunged again and again, driven by the instinct to run, to escape the fire he believed was closing in. The weakened lock from earlier training sessions shuddered under the impact. Ray scrambled to his feet just as Blaze struck the door with a force he hadn't shown in days. The bottom hinge snapped. Ray reached out to grab the chain, but Blaze barreled past him, knocking him into a supply cart that toppled loudly across the hallway. Emergency shutters began dropping through the facility, but the vibration and noise only deepened Blaze's panic. He tore down the main hall, muscles quivering, panting as if the flames were already licking at his heels. Officers shouted over the alarm, trying to block the exits, but Blaze was running on pure survival. He reached the fallback emergency exit just as the system unlocked for evacuation protocol. A gust of freezing night air swept in, carrying the scent of smoke from the small fire behind the building. Blaze didn't hesitate. He vanished into the darkness like a shadow chased by ghosts. Brooks rushed into the corridor, breath tight. Where is he? Ray, still gripping the pain in his shoulder, forced himself up. He's gone. The blast triggered his trauma. He's reliving the canyon fire. Fear flickered in Brooks' eyes, not fear of Blaze hurting someone, but fear of what Blaze might do to himself. Outside, snowflakes drifted across the parking lot as Blaze sprinted into the tree line, paws digging into frozen earth. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he had to get away before the world collapsed again, before the fire trapped him like it had trapped Ethan. Back inside, Ray grabbed his jacket, ignoring the throb in his arm. "I'm going after him," he said. Brooks hesitated, then nodded. "Take a radio. And Ray, find him fast. He won't survive another night like the one he lived through." As Ray bolted into the cold, Blaze's silhouette disappeared deeper into the woods, swallowed by darkness and memory. And while Clearwater tried to contain the chaos, one small, unintended consequence was already unfolding. Harper Summers, awake in her bedroom across town, felt something wrong in her chest, as though a part of her heart had just broken free and run into the night. Snow drifted through the night as Blaze tore deeper into the woods, breath steaming in frantic bursts. His paws pounded across the frozen ground, each step driven by memories that refused to fade. The world around him blurred, replaced by echoes of Ethan's voice and the roar of the canyon fire. Miles away, Harper jolted upright in her bed. Something inside her felt wrong, tight, heavy, as though a string connecting her to Blaze had been yanked hard. She slipped from under the covers and padded to the living room window, seeing the storm swirl outside with an anxious pull in her chest. Emily found her standing there, shivering in her pajamas. "Honey, what are you doing up?" Harper swallowed, eyes wide. "He's scared, Mummy. Blaze is out there." Emily froze at the certainty in her daughter's voice. "Sweetheart, it's late. He's safe with the officers." But Harper shook her head softly. "No, he's not." Before Emily could answer, Harper grabbed her Fox backpack and ran for the front door. Emily lunged after her, calling her name, but the child was already on the porch, swallowed by the swirl of falling snow. Panic hit Emily like a blow as she sprinted after her daughter into the freezing night. In the woods, Blaze slowed near the edge of Clearwater Park. His sides quivered from exhaustion, but a faint sound carried through the wind, a small, distant cry. It wasn't a memory, it was real. His ears snapped forward, and something instinctual pulled him toward the source like a lifeline. Harper struggled down the snowy path, calling for Blaze with every ounce of breath she had. The trail dipped toward the park's frozen lake, the ice slick and pale under the moonless sky. She stepped onto it without hesitation, her small boots sliding just enough to make the darkness ripple beneath her. Emily reached the tree line just in time to see Harper out on the ice. Fear strangled her voice. "Harper, come back!" But the wind swallowed her cry, and Harper stepped farther out, hoping Blaze might hear her. Her weight shifted, and the lake responded with a deep, unsettling crack. Blaze burst from the shadows, barking sharply, his voice sharp with warning. Harper gasped, spotting him on the bank. "Blaze!" she cried, taking an instinctive step toward her friend. Another crack sliced through the frozen silence. A sheet of ice sagged under her feet, trembling like glass under pressure. Blaze sprinted onto the ice without hesitation, claws skidding across the slick surface. The lake groaned beneath them both, the sound rising like a warning neither could outrun. Harper reached out, tears freezing at the corners of her eyes. "Please, don't let me fall." The ice gave way with a violent shatter. Harper plunged downward, her scream muffled by the rush of freezing water. Blaze lunged, teeth catching the back of her jacket just before she disappeared completely. His muscles trembled as he anchored himself against the breaking ice. Pulling with everything he had left, the lake attacked them with savage cold, water surging against Blaze's neck and chest. He dug his claws into the collapsing edge, refusing to release the little girl thrashing below him. Inch by inch, he hauled her upward, whining through the strain. Harper coughed, sobbing, her arms wrapping around Blaze's fur for life. Emily reached the shore just as Blaze heaved Harper onto the solid part of the ice. She dropped to her knees, pulling her daughter close. "Oh God, Harper!" But this danger wasn't over. Blaze's back leg slipped, the ice beneath him spiderwebbing with deep fractures. His body trembled, sliding toward the widening hole. Ray and Jenna arrived seconds later, drawn by Emily's frantic screams. Ray threw himself across the ice, spreading his weight as he reached for Blaze's collar. "Come on, buddy. Don't quit on me." Jenna crawled beside him, adding her hands, her voice trembling as she whispered encouragement she wasn't sure he could hear. With one final pull, Ray yanked Blaze free from the collapsing edge. The dog collapsed onto the snow, chest heaving, eyes half closed from exhaustion and cold. Harper crawled toward him, wrapping her arms around his neck despite her shaking. "You saved me," she whispered. Blaze pressed his nose weakly into her shoulder, choosing her even as the world blurred at the edges, and as sirens approached in the distance, echoing through the storm, the truth settled softly over the scene. Blaze had run from his past, but tonight, he ran straight toward the one thing he could still protect, the girl who had stopped the beast, and the only one who could lead him home. The storm faded by dawn, leaving the world wrapped in a quiet blanket of snow. At Clearwater's small emergency vet clinic, soft lights glowed through frosted windows. Blaze lay on a padded table, wrapped in warm blankets, his breathing shallow but steady. The cold had taken a toll on him, yet he held on with the stubborn strength of a soul who had fought too many battles. Harper sat beside him, bundled in a borrowed coat. Her small hands rested gently on Blaze's shoulder, trembling less now that she could feel the warmth returning to his body. Emily stood behind her, holding her close, watching the dog, who had risked everything to save her daughter, without a second thought. Ray paced the hallway, arms crossed tightly, replaying every second on the ice. He'd seen courage in K9s before, but what Blaze did went beyond training, beyond instinct. It was loyalty, not to a mission, not to a handler, but to a little girl who carried a piece of his past, without even knowing it. Dr. Mercer stepped into the room, rubbing fatigue from his eyes. "He's stable," he said softly. "Hypothermia hit him hard, but he's responding. This dog, he shouldn't have survived that fall." But something kept him fighting. His gaze shifted to Harper, and she held Blaze's paw just a little tighter. Blaze stirred at the sound of her breathing. His ears twitched, and slowly, painfully, his eyes fluttered open. The first thing he saw was Harper leaning over him, tears glistening but hopeful. For a moment, Blaze didn't move, unsure if the world around him was real or another fading memory. Then Harper whispered, her voice barely more than warm breath in the cold room. "You came back for me." Blaze's tail thumped once, weak but certain. He nudged his nose into her hand, closing his eyes, as if savoring the simple comfort he'd feared he would never feel again. Emily wiped her cheeks, overwhelmed by the gentleness between them. Ray stepped forward, resting a hand on Blaze's back, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath the thick fur. "You did good, buddy," he murmured. "You finally let someone in." Blaze exhaled softly, a fragile sigh that carried both exhaustion and peace. Weeks passed, and the snow in Clearwater gave way to early spring. Blaze regained his strength with each day, staying in a recovery kennel filled with drawings Harper made for him, crayon, suns, crooked little foxes, and pictures of Blaze standing happily beside her. He often fell asleep with his nose pressed to them. One bright morning, the training center gathered in the courtyard. Officers stood in uniform, families filled the benches, and Harper sat front row with her fox backpack perched on her lap. Blaze walked beside Ray with a new steady gait, wearing a polished collar that caught the morning light. Captain Brooks stepped up to the podium, her voice carrying across the courtyard. Today, we honor a dog who reminded us what loyalty means. Blaze didn't just save a child, he rescued himself from the grief that nearly destroyed him, and he found his purpose again. The crowd applauded as Blaze sat tall and proud. Harper ran to him before the ceremony even ended, throwing her arms around his neck. Blaze bent his head and rested it gently against her shoulder, the same way he once rested against Ethan during long nights in the canyon. This time, though, the touch wasn't haunted, it was healing. Dr. Mercer approached Emily afterward, handing her a small folder. Blaze is ready, he said quietly, and I think he knows where he belongs. Emily looked down at her daughter, who was now laughing as Blaze nudged her playfully. Her voice softened. We'd be honored to take him home. Ray knelt beside Blaze, giving him one last scratch behind the ear. Take care of them, he whispered. Blaze leaned in, pressing his forehead against Ray's chest, a gesture of gratitude no words could match. Then he trotted to Harper, who took his leash as naturally as breathing. As the sun dipped low over Clearwater, Blaze walked out of the training grounds with Harper and Emily beside him. For the first time since the canyon fire, he didn't look back in fear. The weight was gone. The ghosts were gone. All that remained was the quiet certainty that he had found home again in the hands of the little girl who melted the heart everyone else feared. If Blaze's journey meant something to you, drop a 1-inch theta comments. That's all it takes. And if you want to walk with us through more stories of courage, healing, and second chances, make sure to subscribe. There's a lot more coming, and I'd be grateful to have you here for every chapter.
If this story touched you the way it touched us, let me know with the simplest comment possible. Just type 1 if you felt hope, or narrow if it left you speechless.